My name's Rupert Clubb. I have a day job. I'm the Director of Communities, Economy and Transport for East Sussex County Council. But I'm also the Chief Officer Lead for Transport for the South East. And we're very grateful for the CIHT laying on the venue and the opportunity to come and talk to you. It's really important for us to get lots of information out of you today. And you will note that when you go out for teas and coffees, we've got a little mailing list. We would be absolutely delighted if you want to have more information about Transport for the South East, get engaged. Do please put your details on there. And you'll also note, Martin tells me of a time when you used to have to put coins into phone boxes and stuff like that. We are moving with the times. We've set up a little hashtag for today, driving economic growth. I've already done my LinkedIn. Feel free to tweet or LinkedIn or whatever the appropriate term is, so that we can start driving the conversation about the importance of driving economic growth and using transport to facilitate that. I suppose it would be easy for me to go into why, what the legislation says about subnational transport bodies. And it is important, and I always say to the team, look, you've got to look and see what the legislation says about these things. The government recognised it in the sense that they legislated for it. They recognise the importance of a far greater geography when it comes to developing transport interventions. And that's what STBs are set out to do. Our transport strategies are there to facilitate economic growth, and really, really important for the South East is that they have to have regard to the social and environmental issues that you might notice within a particular geographic area. So I guess taking you through why is this so important for the South East? Well, have a little look at this chart. If you combine London and the South East, then that sort of economic powerhouse, that contribution to GVA is massive. If you strip out London, you can see that the South East contributes nearly 15% of the country's GVA. So we are an important powerhouse. To my mind, if you're talking about productivity and rebalancing economies and so on and so forth, you've got to make sure that investment in the regions is appropriate, because whatever happens in the South East will have a direct bearing on the North and the Midlands and so on and so forth. So, our starting point has to be the economy. And back in May last year, we launched an economic connectivity review, which rather than, the transport planners tell me about all the various interventions, rather than starting at that point, we said, actually what's really important is a focus on the economy first. If you understand that and understand how that might grow, how sectors move about, and what business-to-business interactions are, then you can start to sensibly plan for the right transport interventions. So the South East, an economic motor and an international gateway. International gateways couldn't be more topical. What is really interesting for the South East, when you look at Dover, Eurotunnel, Portsmouth and Southampton, there's a substantial movement of goods and services that come both in and out of the UK. If you're Nissan in Sunderland, you'll ship your vehicles out of Southampton, as you will if you're Jaguar Land Rover. Slightly more controversial, Honda. They're currently moving vehicles in and out of Southampton. And if you take Southampton Port as an example, if you go there, you will see multi-storey car parks full of brand new cars waiting to be shipped. You're talking about the export of £40 billion worth of goods a year. It's absolutely phenomenal. So wherever you are in the UK, you will be reliant on those international gateways. If you look at our airports, Gatwick handles nearly 46 million passengers a year. Southampton 2 million, Heathrow about 80 odd. Before you know where you are, you're moving 120 million passengers a year in and out of Gatwick, Heathrow, Southampton. Couple that with the movement of goods and services through key ports, you can see how the South East is so fundamental to the success of the UK economy. So it's all well and good, people saying that we need to have more investment in the North. Actually, if you don't get investment in the South East, then you will start to cripple and hamstrung your wider UK economy. And that connectivity to those hubs is what businesses and what industry rely on. Now, what's really interesting is you'll quite often hear, and this is a little bit naughty, but indulge me, you'll quite often hear, Transport for the North talking about, underinvestment in transport infrastructure, and we need more money. And the government talks about rebalancing the economy. They talk about how they need to improve productivity in the Midlands, in the Northwest, in the Northeast. Yes, of course, absolutely, spot on. Why wouldn't we want to support productivity elsewhere? But this business about infrastructure funding and that the South East drags it all away from other parts of the country does not bear scrutiny. If you look at what I'm showing you here, you can see that when you take London out of the equation, and that's really important to do because London, if you put London in, transport infrastructure spend gets skewed. If you take London out, you can see that the South East isn't drawing all the money. Actually, quite a lot is going to the North and the Midlands. And if you reflect on the point I mentioned about the importance of international gateways and the importance of that connectivity, you can see that actually maybe the South East isn't getting the levels of investment it needs. And if some of you, I'm sure, actually let's have a little show of hands, let's make this a bit interactive. Anybody live south of London? Yeah. Anybody had the benefit of a Southern train? GTR franchise? Pretty painful. Anybody driven along the main South Coast route? The M27, A27, yes. Doesn't it feel a little more than a country lane in parts? It's supposed to be a trunk road, it's supposed to be part of the strategic road network. Anybody travelled up the A3 through Guildford? Oh, did it make you wince? Yeah. So, you start to get a sense that the transport infrastructure in the South East has some real challenges, some real pinch points. And if you're moving goods and services, or you're moving people, or you're having business-to-business interactions, then the connectivity is absolutely fundamental. If you look at the South East, outside of London, the A27, M27 is the next radial route, and it is excruciating. Travelling along from Portsmouth all the way through to Hastings, it's pinch points, block points, and then if you think, well, I might cut north, well, you open yourself up into another world of pain, don't you? And then you try and get on the M25, the Southwest Quadrant and the M25. I've missed planes because of the M25 Southwest Quadrant, and I'm sure I'm not alone. So there are some real challenges. So it's important to understand the evidence and the facts around investment decisions because, and you would expect me to say this, wouldn't you, but the South East is a major contributor to how the national economy functions. It won't surprise you to know that we've got a vision, and you might have sort of got the gist that the international gateway element is a key component of how we function, how we work, and will be for our transport strategy. And the key to what Transport for the South East does is facilitating economic development, and we will do that by really good quality integrated transport systems. And the key is how we make the lot of our communities better. Now that's what it fundamentally comes down to. And in doing that, and this is really important, as I say to my lot, go back to the legislation, you've got to have regard to the social and environmental aspects of the communities, of the area, of the geography that you're working in. So this is not just about transport for transport's sake. This is about making the world, frankly, a better place. And I'll show you a little a map in a minute about the importance of the natural environment for the South East. And of course, fundamentally, it goes without saying, public body, public funding, ensuring that there is that value for money there. So we've got three strategic principles. Again, it won't surprise you to know this is about high quality, sustainable, integrated transport. But it is, again, reflecting on that growing economy, allowing that competitiveness in what is a global marketplace, will continue to be a global marketplace, whatever the future might hold. And then, issues around safety and quality of life, creating opportunity. Transport can help with productivity. It can help with facilitating opportunity. It can help people get to places, where they can improve their educational attainment, where you can create aspiration and create opportunity. And of course, the reason I live in the South East, and again, I would say this, it's quite a special place to live. South Downs National Park, High Weald, area of outstanding natural beauty, fantastic coastline. You can find places that are tranquil. And part of our job is to work with the natural environment and work with the historic environment to make sure we're doing the right thing by our communities, and we're not creating some sort of inappropriate legacy for a really important part of the UK. So our transport network, well, I thought I'd put this up. It just reminds us that it's a bit of a spaghetti, isn't it? And when you start to overlay strategic road network, major road network, rail networks, ports, airports, and so on and so forth. And the point I made earlier on about the only radial route outside of London is down here. You try getting east-west in the centre of the southeast. It's really, really tricky. I mean, yeah, for sure, the A272 is a lovely Sunday afternoon drive, but it is not a way of getting across the southeast with any degree of pace. We have a number of rail franchises operating within the southeast area. Specifically mention the GTR franchise. Some real challenges there. We want to see the franchise system simplified. It is far too complicated. And we also recognise that the infrastructure that supports rail operating companies is challenging. Those of you that perhaps live in Brighton and use the Brighton Main Line would have noticed that Network Rail blockaded a section of the Brighton Main Line to try and bring about some improvements to improve reliability. Now, the challenge for us is thinking about all of this transport investment pot. At the moment, it's quite siloed. We spend some on roads, we spend some on rail. Well, here's a question. Should we be taking Highways England's funding and where it's appropriate, be using that to improve the rail network? Should we be having off-network investment in other modes of transport? And there's some real challenges ahead, aren't there? The government said no new petrol and diesels by 2040. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said, right, you lot, and that's us, by the way, we've got 12 years in order to slow down emissions to avoid a 2-degree rise in global temperatures. It's incumbent on us, isn't it, to make sure we're putting in place the right interventions, the right demand management tools to help make that transition. Clean growth, air quality. You just have to read a whole wealth of government publications on the impacts that poor air quality has on health. Yesterday, or was it the day before, Future of Mobility launch, again, really clear reference to the impact that 27% of emissions are, global greenhouse gas emissions come from transport, but also the impact on health. And it's our job, is it not? As governments, as local authorities, as subnational transport bodies, as supply chain, to make sure we are doing our bit to, cheesy I know, but make the world a better place. Crikey, that's what I go into public service for. Is to make an improvement, to transform communities. So it's incumbent on all of us. I mentioned protected landscapes. What a place to live, eh? National parks, New Forest, South Downs, North Kent Downs, high area of outstanding natural beauty in the High Weald, Chilterns, Isle of Wight. But you can see from a transport perspective that's quite challenging. And again, everybody, people asked me, they said, what's transport for the South East big thing? Is it a Trans-Pennine Highway? Is it a high-speed rail services? To which my answer is, well, actually, no, we don't have one big thing. And actually, to have one big thing in an area like the South East would be wrong. We are not in the business of sticking new roads cutting through this swathes of important landscape and natural designations. But what we do have is a network that exists that in part isn't fit for purpose. So surely our starting point needs to be getting the strategic road network in the right shape, getting reliability on our rail services before we even start looking at new infrastructure. And it was interesting actually, just a little deviation, just thinking about the Chief Executive of the Environment Agency talking about in 25 years' time water stress is going to be a real challenge. And that companies, water companies need to be thinking about new resources. Well, again, the same principle applies. If you're a water company, and actually for us as consumers who pay for water, better to reduce demand for water first. And then better to think about things like effluent reuse before you get to the place of thinking about new reservoirs. And you can apply that argument to the transport network. Better to get the system working for you. Better to think about how we change demand. You know, going to London on a Friday, it's a pleasure, isn't it? You can get a seat on the train. You don't have to wait, you know, 5, 6 deep for a Northern Line train to Old Street. Fridays are pretty empty. People are working from home. People are working more flexibly. Digital infrastructure is enabling that. Flexible, agile working. You know, does that then become more of the norm? And you know, can we influence that more so that demand for travel changes? And then Martin touched upon, and I mentioned the future of mobility. Wow, how do we even start to think about what's going to happen in 20 or 30 years? I was just thinking about when Martin made mention of the pace at which technological change is taking place. If you ever go to the University of Surrey, they've got a 5G centre. And as you're waiting there for whoever it is who's going to come and collect you, they've got a selection of mobile phones. Martin's first mobile phone was there. It was the size of this laptop, if not bigger, and probably cost about £5,000. But it showed mobile phones through the ages. You know, and everybody's got their favourite, haven't they? You know, Nokia phone or a Motorola or whatever it might be. But the pace of development is absolutely phenomenal. And that digital infrastructure, both in terms of fibre broadband, but also you know, the cell network is moving apace. And what's really interesting is how younger people are using technology. And when I say younger people, it probably, and you can throw something at me if you like, but it probably counts us all out of that debate. You know, you can see that younger people are not interested really in cars. They're saying they're expensive, they cost loads to insure, you've got to fuel them, and they sit on a drive or on a pavement for 95% of the time. They are interested in saying, I need to go from here to there, I want to do it now, I want to pay for that bit of mobility, that journey, and then that's it. I don't want to own an asset, but I want to buy my transport, my mobility very differently. And you know, that is becoming more and more commonplace. I don't know whether it is yet, but I would imagine the Oxford English Dictionary will have Uber as a you know, I'm going to get an Uber. So the way in which people are moving around is changing. And our job as transport planners, as strategic planners, as influencers of infrastructure, have a job to make sure that we're keeping pace and we're understanding the trends and data. And how you then step out a transport strategy up to 2050 is really challenging because there are lots of unknowns. And trying to forecast that is tricky stuff. And to a degree, that's where you come in. Because you know, you're all engaged as well in this field. And you know, us understanding what you're spotting as trends and what you're thinking about as businesses is going to be really key for us in terms of our transport strategy development. I do go around a bit, so I know we're on protected landscapes, but you know, got to indulge me. Now, size of the prize. This is really interesting. If you look at the economy at the moment, you know, we're at about 200 billion gross value added. Now, if we did nothing, if we just said today, well, actually, we don't need some national transport boards, that's it. Of course, the economy will grow. Of course, it will grow. And we think it will probably grow by 2050 to about 330 odd billion in terms of gross value added. But the size of the prize is massive if we get the transport interventions right. And if we genuinely facilitate economic growth, having regard to both environment and social, you know, the size of the prize is some 500 billion in gross value added. Now, if we can do that with regard to the importance of our natural environment, and we can do that making sure we've got the right social interventions in, so people have access to housing, to employment space, to education, to healthcare, then we start to get something that actually works for communities. So that, you know, that's when we talk about GVA, you know, a 50% boost, that's got to be worth having. But there's got to be some caveats around that. You know, we've got to do it and make sure it's done in the right way. This is quite an interesting chart. This came from our economic connectivity review. So this was a piece of work that said, actually, we've got to understand how the economy starts to function first before we go into transport strategy proper. And you know, part of the work that we did was start to identify some of the key corridors. Those of you that know the South East well will recognise these, and they will recognise them as some of the corridors that I've spoken of. But what's really interesting for me is the connectivity outside of the South East. So Martin talked about the relationship between subnational transport bodies. You know, when when we were asked what are our priorities for investment in the South East, not only did we talk about investment priorities within our geography, but we also said actually the Oxford-Cambridge Expressway, really, really important for the South East. We recognise that investments and interventions outside of our own geography might well also support economic productivity and growth. So for us, really important to understand those corridors, the interactions in and out of the geography, the relationships with those ports and hubs that I spoke about earlier. So that's my whistle-stop tour. There's plenty of opportunity, I think, later on to have questions. Really do want to hear your views on what I've talked about and what Edmund and the team are going to be talking about as we go through. So thank you very much for indulging me, and I hope you have a fantastic morning here.